So you know how at the end of each act, the narrator will pipe up and give you a score of sorts. And then...
You're doing a fine job, Laura.
Like that, right? And for the longest time, we've been trying to figure out how that works. So I finally bit the bullet, dug into the code, and we figured out, or I figured out, how all of that works. And it's so... Some of it's really boring, but some of it's interesting, and some of it's just weird. In the game, there is no score like in a lot of Sierra games. No score, right? There's no points here. But internally, the game is keeping score. There is a point system. It just doesn't tell you. So I went through and I figured out where all the different points are that you can get. There are 50 of them. There are 50 points you can get in the game. Most of them are really boring and not even that interesting. For instance, here you can see you get a point for getting the press pass. Now, the way that this works is that each time the game gives you some points, you have to tell the game how many points you're going to give the player, and then you have to give it a flag. So you see this flag column here. Now, it just so happens that each one of these things gives you 1 point. They could have put a 2 or a 3 or a 5 or a 500 in it, but they just decided everything that you do gives you 1 point. So it's kind of redundant and superfluous. The flag is there so that you don't get duplicate points and to account for the fact that you can get the same point multiple times. So for instance, to get the press pass, you can either use the hand on the press pass just in the drawer, or you can look at the press pass and then the little inset comes up, the little circle thing with the detail, and then press on it from there. But those are two different things. So it's you're clicking on the press pass, but you can click on it in two different locations. Another good example is the boot. So you get a point for either getting the boot, or if you look at the boot on the floor, or if you magnify the boot, but it's all the same thing to the game. They didn't want to give you multiple points. So that's what the flags are for there. So a lot of these are not all that interesting. It's stuff that you're doing anyway, like trading the baseball, talking to Ziggy. Some of the things are not stuff that even you get to choose to do, like Laura and Steve kiss in that Act 2 cutscene. You get a point for that. You have to see it. It's just a cutscene that you have to see. Finding the dead bodies. One thing that was surprising to me is that you get a point for magnifying the Ankh on the floor right before you find Carter, but you have to magnify it before you pick it up. If you pick it up and then magnify it, you don't get a point for that. You only get a point for magnifying the Rosetta Stone in one place. So like there's two halves of it. But whichever half you magnify first, you get a point for that, and then not for the other one. Oh, one thing that I thought was interesting, you know all those eavesdrop scenes that you can overhear in the game? There's only one of them that will give you points, and that's the one where you eavesdrop on Yvette and Ernie, right? And you could walk in there if you wanted to, but the game doesn't care about that. But if you eavesdrop on Yvette and Ernie, you get a point for that, but no other eavesdropping scenes. Getting more items here, putting Barney back in his cage. Here's one that's easy to miss, I think. If you interrupt Yvette and O'Reilly, like actually go into the room, you'll get a point. And if you interrupt Yvette and Steve, during the back rub scene, you'll get a point for that too. So I took that and I made a combined points tab here too, because each row here is every time that the add points function is called or script is called. And so you get duplicates, right? So this is narrowing it down and just saying, okay, instead of both times it calls the script to add for the press pass, it's the press pass, right? So it did all of that. And then I went and I figured out how they actually give you that score at the end, or give you that rating at the end where good job, Laura, or whatever. So at the end of each act, it takes your score, takes your points, and then it puts it through an equation. It takes your points, it multiplies it by 100, and then it divides by a divisor that depends on the act. So for instance, the divisor variable for Act 1 is 5. The divisor variable for Act 2 is 12. So whatever magic number they come up with, multiply by 100, divide by some other number, okay? And that'll give you a score within a range. So that's sort of your rating score. And then what it does is that it figures out different bands of scores. So the way to think about it in like a layman's way would be to think of it sort of like A through F grades in school. Like, you know, you get in between this and you get an A or a B and a C and a D. In the actual game's code, it just is the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But that gets a little bit weird because then you're thinking about, well, okay, I got a 74 and that's a 5. Like what? No. So the way it works is an F grade. I'm calling them F through A because that's like a school thing and that sort of makes sense. But that's not what the game actually calls it. 0 through 20 is an F. 21 through 40 is a D. 41 through 60 is a C. 61 through 80 is a B. And 81 through 100 is an A. And then what the game does is for each of those, there are 5 different things that the narrator could say to you. So they accounted for the fact that, you know, maybe you get an F, all 5. Maybe you get a D, all 5, right? So there's enough responses that if you do get that letter grade in each act, then there's enough responses. And it keeps track of what the narrator has told you already and then just pulls the next one off of the pile. So it accounts for the fact that if you get like 2 A's and 2 B's and then an A again, you're never going to hear the same thing twice, even though it's all going to be the same general tone. In Act 1, the maximum number of points you can get is 5. And every one of those things is something that you have to do to finish the act. So you will, if you finish Act 1 without glitches, you will get 5 points. So you have to get a score of 100 for Act 1. I guess they felt like bad for you or something. I don't know. They're trying to encourage you. You will always get the highest score in the first act. So what does that mean? It means that, remember what I just said, each of these other ones has 5 responses that you could potentially hear, but you'll never get to the 5th one because you'll always hear the first one first, and there aren't enough acts to hear all 5 responses, right? You cannot get 5 Fs in a row because the first one has to be an A, right? And then for Act 2, there are 12 points that you can get, and the minimum to finish the act is 7, so we're starting to get some optional ones. But what it means is that the lowest you could possibly get is a C. So again, it is not possible to get more than 3 D grades or more than 3 F grades, and it just keeps going like that. As far as I can tell, I haven't tested it like completely thoroughly yet, but at least doing the math and testing it a little bit, you can never get an F grade, even though there are responses for it, that you can never get that. And you can only get a D once. It is possible to get a D if you do it right in Act 3, barely. But that's it. To get all A's in all acts, you have to get every single point. Like, you cannot miss a single point. If you want to get all points in Act 4, you have to pick up the boot in Act 4. Otherwise, you can't get the minimum points to get an A. You also have to make Rex talk. The game will give you a point for making Rex talk at any point in the game, including the chase at the end. But if you do that, if you wait until like the last minute, then in Act 4, you're going to be a couple points short. You're going to be a point short. So these are all the F responses. You will never, unless you use glitches, you should never hear these.
Consider another line of work, Laura. Perhaps you should investigate a job in the mail room. At this rate, you'll never work in this town again. Have you thought about a less demanding occupation?
And I like the way she delivers this one.
There's a name for detectives like you. Unemployed.
So there's that. There's 2, 3. This is the second one. If my math is right, you can hear this one.
Not bad for an amateur.
And then the rest of these I don't believe you can get.
Maybe you're a little preoccupied today. Though still wet behind the ears, you're not without potential. You could be doing worse, but not much.
I like that one.
Whatever you're doing, try to do a lot more of it in the next act.
I don't think that you can hear this one.
You have the capability to be a good detective, but you need to work harder to show it.
Or this one.
Strive to excel. At the moment, you seem to be striving to be satisfactory.
Quick side note here, a little bit of a mystery. So remember how I said that each grade has 5 different messages that you can hear, and the game just pulls the next one off the top of the list. There are variables in the game that keep track of where you are in that list. So at the beginning of the game, all of those should be 1. In other words, for each of those grade bands, pull the first message off of the top and then increment it so that the next time it's the second one. At the beginning of the game, the variable for the F grades, the lowest grades, it's 1, as it should be. But when you start the game, you get one of these act break sequences, right? So it's showing us we're in Act 1. Even though you don't get a grade here, it doesn't display the text box, it's still calling the code to give you a grade. So what it's doing right here, and what it's already done, is said, how many points do you have? You have 0. So that's an F grade. So it's already incremented that variable. It's already pulled the first response off the top. So if we look now at what this variable is, it's 2, because the game has already said you got an F grade, and the next time that you go to the act break, if you get an F again, then you should grab the second message. It's obviously at the very beginning of the game, you shouldn't see a message at all. It doesn't display the message, but it still is like, oh, we should have played the F message, so the next time play the second F message. So even if you could get an F grade at any point, you will never hear this one.
Consider another line of work, Laura.
Good job, game. If you're in ScummVM and then press Control-Alt-D, and then type in VV space G space 15, that's going to give you the value of global variable 15, which is your points. So if you want to check your points in ScummVM, you can. So here I have 18 of them. There you go, after decades and decades. So another mystery solved. Not the mystery in the game, but